Chapter 1 Neuro. It is well accepted amongst the most respected galactic scholars that the Sethonians were by far the most intelligent known race to have ever existed in the greater universe. They are also credited with having been the most socially inappropriate and disgracefully grubby of all creatures. News of their annihilation at the hands of the massive grovelled asteroid was greeted with a mixture of emotions. Whilst the galactic scientific community were devastated, all others were glad to be rid of these ill-mannered, foul-smelling, arrogant know-alls. Sethonians were like walking encyclopedias of knowledge, like breathing Google searches. You could ask them the most complicated of questions and almost always get the correct answer, provided you were prepared to endure the continuous nose-picking, earwax removal, farting, bum-scratching and burping that accompanied their responses, as well as the wafting stench of their dirty, unbathed bodies. It was their armpits that were the real killers. Had they kept their arms by their side, things may have been a little more tolerable. Unfortunately, as they spoke, they waved their arms wildly, causing their armpits to work like powerful toxic pumps. It was therefore always wise to bring along a few clothes pegs to block your nose, just in case. It was also always advisable to stand at least 10 meters upwind of a Sethonian, so that your scent wafted towards them, rather than their lethal pong wafting towards you. When it was one of those days where the wind swirled around a lot, you had no choice but to keep shifting your position. You didn't have to worry about explaining why you were continually moving around, though, because Sethonians were so incredibly self-obsessed that they would not have even noticed if you'd stripped down to your underwear whilst moving around, or even if you'd cut off one leg, swung it from side to side furiously while hopping around on the other leg singing Yankee Doodle Dandy. Every moment of every day was all about them. Sethonians also lacked any sense of social etiquette. Their favourite topic of conversation, even at the dinner table, was bodily functions. They would always proudly give anyone willing to listen a totally uncensored account of their daily bowel movements. They also failed to understand the purpose and meaning of small talk or social pleasantries. They did not mince their words and gave absolute down-the-line responses to questions if, for instance, you made the fatal error of greeting them with a throwaway line like, "Hi, how are you?" Be prepared to spend the next hour hearing a blow-by-blow account of exactly how they were, from the top of their head to the tip of their toes. It is said that every sight, sound, touch and smell was analysed by Sethonians and then stored in their enormous brains' vast memory banks for future reference. As their hunger for knowledge and advancement grew over the centuries, their sophisticated brains worked out ways to hijack most of the nutrients that should have gone to the other parts of their bodies. Consequently, over time, their brains became progressively larger and their bodies progressively scrawnier. By the time of their recent demise, they resembled massive lollipops on fragile sticks. Yet their ridiculous appearance did not bother them in the slightest. They believed that they would eventually be able to move around and move things around using mental thought alone. So things like arms and legs and fingers and toes would eventually become redundant anyway. They would be unnecessary excess baggage. Many of them had already started to hover ever so slightly above the ground for a few seconds, totally unaided. It is strongly acknowledged amongst learned galactic scholars that they would have eventually achieved their end goal, were it not for the cataclysmic event that led them to their untimely passing. A lot of the more advanced technology found in the greater universe today is attributed to the Sethonians. They are believed to have built the very first subatomic particle thrust spacecraft, and to have been the first to discover the wonders of light amplification by stimulated emission of radiation, otherwise known as laser technology. They are also attributed with having produced the very first hydro panel. Prior to its destruction, the planet of Seth resembled one enormous, fully integrated circuit board. The facades of every single house and building cleverly doubled as one useful electronic component or another. They took the shape of enormous circuit breakers, mercury switches, fuses, resistors, filament lamps, capacitors, transformers, solenoids, fuel cells, ceramic resonators, plug and socket connectors, relay switches, inductors, and on and on. Thousands of the more cutting-edge electronic components that dotted the landscape of Seth are yet to be discovered on Earth. These include magnidian carboditherial stabilizers, laserpidian deflectors, Mercusal vibroformers, and nucleic strethoresonators. Seth's square rather than round shape added to its overall look. At night, the millions of red and blue laser sensors created a skyline more spectacular than the dazzling neon billboards of Las Vegas. When Seth exploded, technological debris was sent flying into outer space in all directions. It is believed that some of this debris even managed to make its way to Earth years later. Each component's discovery was kept top secret by governments in power at the time. Countries that were lucky enough to receive these free technological marvels put together teams of their finest scientists and set them the exciting task of unravelling these new technologies and identifying useful future applications. It is quite possible that the lasers that drive our Nintendo Wiis, Xbox 360s and PS3s are thanks to the Sethonians. Many innocent Earthlings who saw these enormous glowing chunks of technology fall to the ground were rigorously discredited in nasty government-funded smear campaigns. Still, many of the more steadfast accounts, often corroborated by several eyewitnesses, sparked enough interest to get airtime on TV shows like A Current Affair and 60 Minutes. Of course, all such claims were vehemently denied by those on the government payroll. From its highly classified location at the infamous military base Area 51 in southern Nevada, Colonel Jed Rogers responded to such allegations. "Hey, Tracy," laughed Colonel Rogers, arrogantly. "People love their conspiracy theories, don't they? Next thing someone will accuse the US government of having poisoned Elvis Presley." "Did the US government poison Elvis Presley?" smiled Tracy. "Of course not!" shouted Colonel Rogers. As his head nodded unconsciously, his pupils dilated, his palms began to sweat, his nose became itchy, and he struggled to swallow. Neurosynapse was a very typical-looking 19-year-old Sethonian. He had a massive bald head that was about the size of an inflated beach ball. It housed an enormous, highly sophisticated brain. His scalp was lily white, and its elasticized skin coped well with the pressure exerted on it by his continually expanding brain. His entire scalp and forehead was adorned with hundreds of thick, blue veins and red arteries that bulged outwards like ugly keloid scars. The blue veins danced around wildly every time he spoke and gave the impression of wriggling earthworms. In contrast to his colossal head, his body was skeletally thin. His ribs protruded outwards like sharp daggers, and his elbows and knees looked like painful inflammations on their toothpick-like arms and matchstick-like legs. His shoulders and neck slouched forward under the weight of his head. His lips were thin and cold, and his yellow, jaundiced-looking eyes were exceptionally creepy. The lazy left eyelid was always no more than half open, and its eyeball continually shifted from side to side. The rigid right eyelid was always overly wide open, totally incapable of ever closing, even when he slept. And its eyeball never moved even a millimetre. Both eyes tended to water quite a lot, and the left one had the annoying habit of blinking exceedingly rapidly whenever he was thinking. His ears were very large and also elasticized. They were used as a surrogate handkerchief for his continually dripping nostrils. Consequently, his ears were constantly coated in a thick mucus crust, which he thoroughly enjoyed picking at and eating. His armpits were the only part of his body that had any hair, and boy, oh boy, were they hairy. Each resembled a full-blown 20-centimetre long beard. The hairs were all matted and tangled, and formed several perfect Rastafarian dreadlocks. The hairs housed almost every known species of lice and flea. The space between the 4 toes on each of his scrawny feet were packed with more sticky black toe jam than a 200-gram jar of Vegemite. Growing from the base and sides of each foot was a mushroom-like fungus that smelled sulphury and seemed to bubble and fester as he walked. His fingers looked like 10 squashed baby cockroaches and relied on natural attrition for a trim and manicure. His body skin was damp and clammy, and his hands were wet and slimy. It was like shaking hands with a dead fish that has been left unrefrigerated for an entire week. You felt an overwhelming urge to repeatedly scrub your hands with the strongest possible detergent after shaking hands with him. Like all Sethonians, he never once considered taking a bath or a shower and stunk like rotting garbage. The intensity of his stench depended completely on when he'd last been caught in one of Seth's rare but heavy downpours. It always took a really good soaking to purge his skin of its vile smell. His teeth were also left to their own devices. As a result, all of the remaining rotten ones were encased in thick layers of yellow plaque. His breath always smelled as if he'd just eaten a skunk. Being a typical Sethonian adolescent, Neuro dedicated most of his time to the pursuit of knowledge and brilliance. He read and memorized volume after volume of the Galactic Encyclopedia. With over 50,000 existing volumes and about 100 new volumes added every year, there was plenty to keep him busy. The areas that most interested him were astronomy, quantum physics, and mathematics. He had been tracking the grovelled asteroid for over 5 years now, and had recently made a startling discovery. According to his calculations, this enormous, fiery rock had changed its trajectory ever so slightly and was now on a direct collision course with his beloved planet, Seth. His calculations spanned more than 10,000 pages and had been meticulously checked and cross-checked over 1,000 times. He rang one of Seth's head scientists, Rowene Flogg, and advised him of the impending doom. Rowene consulted other distinguished scientists and mathematicians on this matter. To ease their own minds, they did tests and ran numbers for 2 weeks straight. At the end of this lengthy and tiresome process, they concluded that Neuro was blatantly wrong and had completely wasted their valuable time. Neuro begged them to have a look at his calculations rather than rely solely on their own. Rowene and his colleagues found it highly offensive that a 19-year-old kid would have the audacity to challenge their exceptional brains. Despite Neuro having already won several prestigious mathematics and science awards, they were not about to let this upstart undermine their genius and, less importantly, cause unnecessary panic. From that point onwards, they treated Neuro with utter contempt. Each time he phoned them, they hung up on him. Each time he sent them a piece of written correspondence, they divided the pages equally amongst them and used them as toilet paper. When he tried to send them the Sethonian equivalent of emails, they would simply press reply, attach a new sophisticated computer virus, and press send. On the one and only occasion that he managed to disenable their Fort Knox-style security system and enter their fancy offices, they all blocked their ears and started chanting la 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 loudly until he finally gave up trying to speak to them and left defeated. Despite receiving the cold shoulder from these so-called geniuses, he continued to express his grave concerns to anyone willing to listen. On every occasion, though, he was treated like a third-class citizen. Why would they take the word of a 19-year-old kid over the word of a panel of renowned experts? Responses ranged from boredom to amusement to pity. Even his parents and siblings started heckling him. "So, Prophet of Doom, what other disasters do you foresee on the horizon?" laughed his younger brother, Cerebellum. By this point in time, Nero had become really bitter and twisted and longed to see the expression of fear on every single imbecile's face, including those of his family, when the grovelled asteroid finally came into view. By then, it would be far too late to escape. He would be vindicated. It would teach them all a lesson for doubting his brilliance. A few days before the grovelled asteroid was due to hit Seth, Nero packed his spacecraft with his worldly possessions and sufficient food supplies, and then, without saying goodbye to anyone, left for the safety of a burnt-out mini-planet called Silcon. This massive lump of crumbling coal is totally desolate, and a great place to visit if you want complete isolation and not a distraction in the world. Cerebellum awoke especially early to bid his paranoid older brother a temporary farewell. "See you soon, Prophet of Doom," he laughed. "Enjoy the nothingness that is Silcon. Oh, and please bring me back one of those tacky t-shirts that read, 'My brother visited Silcon and all he brought back for me was this burnt-out t-shirt.'" "You won't be seeing me or anything else for that matter ever again," smiled Nero. "For the dead can't see, and the t-shirt that I, and only I, will be wearing will read, 'They refuse to listen to what I said, yet I am alive, and they're all dead.'" Cerebellum's right eye started to water a little bit more than usual, and the blue veins on his lily-white scalp twitched ferociously. "We'll see about that," he screamed venomously, and stormed off. "What if Nero's right?" he thought nervously. Having reached Silcon, Nero impatiently counted down the hours till the main event. He was like an excited kid awaiting their birthday present. He took the opportunity to rehearse the speech that he would soon present to the various galactic satellite news channels. Every single galactic reporter would be dying to get the exclusive scoop on how he managed to be the sole survivor and what it felt like to be the last of his species. He would definitely embellish the story a little bit to give it maximum impact. He would tell a harrowing tale of how he begged and pleaded with his family members to board his spacecraft and how they stubbornly refused. He would secretly squeeze a tiny slice of raw gunny, a vegetable similar to an onion, into his eyes to create artificial tears as he spoke. The fact that this was a complete fabrication did not seem to bother him in the slightest. "If the audience wants tears and emotion, that's what I'll give them," he thought aloud. If things went well, perhaps he would even get to appear on the highest rating of all galactic shows. "Late Night Live with Spalding Slave!" What an amazing platform this would be for him to belittle all of the nincompoops who doubted him and to gloat about his personal genius. The fact that he would be rubbishing the dead did not seem to bother him either. He was really glad that he had kept his 10,000-page journal of mathematical calculations. This would serve as proof of his genius to anyone who doubted his story. This journal would no doubt sell for a huge amount one day on the online Galac Bay. He imagined the movie and book deals that would soon follow. Who would play the role of him in the movie, though? Who would have a big enough head? Finally, the moment of impact arrived, and he counted it down joyously. 10, 9, 8, 7... He then calmly opened a packet of beju, similar to popcorn, and chewed away as he watched the greatest fireworks display of his life. Seth exploded with the same intensity as an egg in a microwave. It literally splattered in all directions, polluting space with a deluge of electronic components and gadgetry. "Ooh, I told you! I told you!" he screamed with absolute delight. But when it was all over, he cried like a baby. He had lost his family, his species, and his planet. He soon composed himself and swore that this would be the last time he would ever cry, the last time he would ever show weakness. From this point onwards, it would all be about him. "Should I reveal myself now to the rest of the galaxy, or wait a few days for maximum impact?" he thought aloud, rubbing his damp, slimy hands together gleefully. "Lying low for a few days is definitely the better option. Let them first talk about us Sethonians as being extinct. Let them do their insincere obituaries, pathetic reflections, and faulty analysis of us as a species. Then I will reveal myself and force them to update their blogs from extinct to almost extinct. This should cause quite a stir. What can I do in the meantime to burn some time?" For now, he would have to be content with picking his nose, biting his fungicidal toenails, and contemplating his future. He would never have predicted the series of events that were about to unfold, and how they would impact on his future.